I have Matt here from Arch Network, one of the most promising Bitcoin protocols that I've come across. Matt, would love to learn a little bit more about Arch and what you guys are building.
So Arch is a Bitcoin native execution platform, actually the first of its kind. What ultimately Bitcoin native means in this context is we built our own VM specifically designed for Bitcoin so we can handle actually native Bitcoin, meaning no wrapped assets and no bridging, which is historically all you can really do to get programmability on Bitcoin. You have to take your Bitcoin somewhere else. So what's really interesting about Arch is we are bringing programmability and true DeFi capabilities to the base layer of Bitcoin, where all the liquidity actually is. Over $2 trillion worth of Bitcoin is looking to be more productive, to earn yield, to participate in DeFi. And we've seen wrapped assets of Bitcoin being bridged over to Ethereum before and being used to actually participate in DeFi, borrow against it, and use that reserve asset to generate yield. But less than 1% of actually all Bitcoin has been bridged over to Ethereum, which kind of represents this friction point that is, just quite frankly untenable for Bitcoin holders, OGs, institutions who don't want to take that risk when they come to try to find opportunities to participate in these types of things. So ultimately, what Arch unlocks is bringing true Turing complete programmability to the base layer of Bitcoin. And you needed new infrastructure to do that, and that's what we've done.
Interesting. So how exactly do you differ from all the other Bitcoin L2s?
Well, first and foremost, all the other Bitcoin L2s are mostly EVM side chains with a bridge. Typically, the first step is you have to bridge your asset to a new network. So you're no longer holding your Bitcoin. You gave up your keys to the bridge operator, and you're minting a new ERC20 token on this new chain. And that's where you can participate with DeFi, right? But you can already do this on Ethereum. You could already do this on Solana. So for us, it was always a non-starter to force them to take on the exact same trust assumptions as what you take on when you go over to ETH mainnet, where there's already a fully mature DeFi ecosystem, a tremendous amount of liquidity already there. So we felt that in order to actually bring a lasting contribution to Bitcoin and bring programmability and yield and a lot of DeFi opportunities to Bitcoin, we had to start with how do we actually do things more natively on Bitcoin instead of trying to get them to bridge?
So we're seeing a lot of Bitcoin treasury companies come online. There's a ton of them. How does yield play into their positioning and differentiation in the market? And why do these treasury companies potentially want to earn yield?
Yeah, so yield is going to be the great differentiator for these digital asset treasury companies. You see MicroStrategy, who has obviously accumulated the most Bitcoin by far. And the reason is because they have their own game that they're playing. They earn yield by selling these financial products through the bonds that they're selling. These other digital asset treasury companies are very one-dimensional. They're just buying it by raising debt or dilution to buy more Bitcoin, but you can't do that forever. You have to reduce your cost of capital and hopefully make it negative so that you can buy more Bitcoin without having to dilute your shareholders. So this is going to be what ultimately digital asset treasury companies are focused on in the next phase, which is we're starting to see that right now. We're speaking with several digital asset treasury companies that are looking for yield on their Bitcoin holdings because they understand that if they can't earn yield, then there's going to be other digital asset treasury companies that are going to buy their Bitcoin from them because they have a cheaper cost of capital.
Basically, what you're enabling is something similar to what Kyle Samani is doing with his Solana DAT, right? You're essentially enabling these Bitcoin companies to go and generate yield on chain, be able to be more productive and maximize Bitcoin per share.
Absolutely, yeah. I think what Solana is doing really well, especially like you mentioned with Kyle Samani and the digital asset company that he's now the chairman of. They're looking for low risk ways to earn yield using blockchain and DeFi so that you can outperform the rest of the market. It's not just about staking for yield, which on a Solana, of course, that's possible. You can make maybe 9% on your assets by staking into Solana. But on Bitcoin, there is no staking yield. It's a proof of work chain. So how can you actually get sustainable and predictable yield for your Bitcoin holdings as an institution or as a whale or a mining company who have, tremendous amount of liquidity, but it's non-productive. You need to make it productive, and that requires a little bit more than what Bitcoin currently offers.
And what's interesting about this is essentially there's orders of magnitude more Bitcoin being held by institutions rather than Solana or Ethereum. So I can see the total addressable market for you guys is absolutely massive.
That's right. Institutions obviously want to hold Bitcoin more than any other digital asset. It's got the most adoption. It's kind of reached that escape velocity as a monetary asset so that it has unprecedented adoption today, and that's just a fact. So over time, you're going to see more Fortune 500 companies putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. You're going to see sovereign nations holding Bitcoin as well. And these digital asset treasury companies are also paving the way for accumulating this asset that is a very exciting thing to hold. And eventually they're going to be leveraging it in a way that is safe, but they're able to make it more productive.
And tell me about the pain points that a lot of larger Bitcoin holders, especially institutions, are facing right now in terms of not being able to generate yield.
Well, there is no yield really. Like Bitcoin is a proof of work chain. It's not a proof of stake chain like everything else. And you have this UTXO model, which makes it very challenging to do, multi-party DeFi things like pools that, honestly, that's what AMMs were built on top of. So in order to actually create yields, you actually have to build some new sophisticated infrastructure that allows traders, institutions, and Bitcoin holders to do new types of things. So when I say that there's no actual yield for Bitcoin, it's mostly rooted in these inflationary emissions and rewards that are, boosted on top of your activity. So when you go over to a new chain on Ethereum or some alt EVM chain, there is some form of yield, but it's all predicated around these emissions of reward tokens, but not actually true in-kind yield for Bitcoin. So that's what we're ultimately trying to fix, and we need to build something actually new to do that.
What about RWAs? Is there a home for RWAs on Bitcoin?
Absolutely. I think Bitcoin is the natural place for RWAs to live, because if we're talking about bringing billions, if not trillions, of RWAs on chain, there isn't enough liquidity on Solana. There's not even enough liquidity on Ethereum to support that wave of adoption. So if we're talking about bringing these income products or private credit and reinsurance, we're talking about $1 trillion industry in TradFi that is going to converge on blockchain, but you need to match it with the appropriate amount of liquidity, and that's only going to happen on Bitcoin.
Interesting. So with the institutions you talk to, are they more interested in just the, let's say, DeFi native kind of strategies that you'll enable, or are they also interested in taking other RWAs on chain, or what's kind of the level of interest in both products?
Yeah, I would say that there's steps that we have to take to make them more comfortable with coming on chain. Historically speaking, institutions keep their Bitcoin in cold storage or a qualified custodian or some type of institutional grade MPC infrastructure. So first we have to meet them where they are on the trust spectrum and work with whatever custody frameworks that they prefer. And that's going to get them to try these yield products out, make their Bitcoin more productive, and then they get a taste of what ultimately could happen if they brought their assets on chain. The next step is obviously creating much more capital efficiency for their assets. So you can loop, you can borrow against your derivative assets or yield-bearing assets, and you can get instant liquidity as opposed to what in the traditional world, you can maybe borrow against your TradFi assets, but what you can't do is you can't get instant liquidity, you can't loop, and you can't leverage those assets in a new type of way, and that's what blockchain ultimately offers.
What's the appetite from institutions for your RWA products?
It's actually quite insane. In the last month and a half, we've already had over 2 billion worth of RWAs pledged to come into this ecosystem and start tokenizing and ready to accept liquidity, right? That's going to be the first major step in this trend of RWAs on Bitcoin, because you already have people that want to make their Bitcoin productive. We've talked about this, right? So, but how do you actually get that yield that's not necessarily rooted in these inflationary emissions, but actually predictable and sustainable and at scale, right? Not just for $12 million, but $12 billion, right? And ultimately, that is what's happening right now. You have institutions that are holding the Bitcoin and they want to borrow against it and put it into some of these private credit vehicles. You have digital asset treasury companies that are looking to also do the same, right? So as more and more of these assets come on chain, there's more predictable and more diversified forms of yield that they're going to be able to choose from, like they traditionally are used to in the TradFi market. And that's something that just doesn't exist today on Bitcoin.
When it comes to RWA liquidity on chain, will it be paired against Bitcoin, or will it pair against USDC? How does that kind of work?
Yeah, so these TradFi assets like private credit and reinsurance, they don't accept Bitcoin per se when you're buying these TradFi products. They take USD actually. So we had to create some pretty sophisticated infrastructure off-chain that allows for compliant issuance. It's very important because you can go to these institutions and they'll say, this is a great idea, we love what you're doing, but there's no way in hell that we can actually support this, without the compliance, required, or the tax compliance as well. That's going to be a big differentiator for people that are like going into the RWA world, is who's actually doing it in the right way that institutions want to work with. So we've been working with a lot of really experienced TradFi experts, and we're working with all the top asset managers like the Fidelities of the world, KKR, Wellington, VanEck. And the first phase for us is just creating these yield products where anybody can put their Bitcoin into a smart contract, they can borrow against it, and then they can deploy those stable coins into the RWA. But on this platform that we have that's coming to market pretty soon called Honeybee, it all happens in one clean, like easy to use step where they just deposit their Bitcoin into the smart contract and everything else happens behind the scenes or under the hood. And then from there, they can manage that derivative asset however they choose, whether they want to loop it for higher yields, they want to borrow against it for some liquidity, or they just want to continue to accumulate more and more of this RWA asset over time.
Interesting. Matt, thanks for coming on today, and I wish you guys the best of luck with the new announcements that you kind of hinted at. So looking forward to seeing some of the cool stuff you guys have been cooking. Where can people learn more about Arch? What's a good place for them to go to find out?
You can go to our website, arch.network. We've got a tremendous amount of documentation if you're interested in diving in deep on exactly what we've built over the last 2 years. And of course, you can follow us on our social comms, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok as well, so that we can do some more educational content. And we'll be producing more of that type of content as people want to learn more about what's coming in Bitcoin DeFi.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on.